Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Vega Pod. On this channel, we'll be discussing both Christian and secular issues from a biblical perspective. All right, I appreciate you guys tuning in. Today, we're going to be just looking at some things with Tom Brady. I was listening to on ESPN, Keyshawn, J. Will, and Zubin, and they had Teddy Bruschi on, and he was sharing some things about Tom Brady and how he strives to connect with his younger teammates and just the amount of effort that he puts into it. As I was listening to it, I was reminded of for us as believers, we are to put in that time and energy and effort into building those relationships with younger believers, believers that we're bringing along, and just other people that are that are unbelievers, and how we're the Bible calls us to be. Uh, Jesus says to be in the world, but not of the world. So we strive to build those relationships and point people towards Jesus. But to do that, we have to be willing to get into the role to a degree without getting overwhelmed by it or consumed by it. So I'm actually going to look at a few things here from the Teddy Bruschi interview that he had to say about Tom Brady. So this starts around the 26 minute mark, 26 and 45 seconds to be exact. And these are some things that Tom Brady says, and I'll include the link to this interview in the description of the video. He says his ability to bring his teammates along. Teddy Bruschi says that Tom Brady does a great job of making his teammates feel like their job is the most important thing, and that he will do everything he can to help them be successful. His ability to welcome new teammates. He gave an example like Fournette when Fournette was signed after he was released by Jacksonville. He points out how when the running backs had difficulty catching the ball, Tom Brady continued to throw them the ball so they could get better at it. His relationship with his wide receivers. Now this is big because his wide receivers are young. You could Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Scotty Miller. These are young receivers, and Tom Brady is older. He's in his 40s. So this is a big generational gap. And one thing that Teddy points out is how Tom Brady makes his big effort to try to get into their world. And he gives a couple of examples. Before we get into it, he also mentions he takes care of the offensive line. Um, and because he spends his time in building this relationship and taking care of his players, he has this credibility with them, right? He can talk strongly to them. And he's also, there's this I guess to a degree like an intimate relationship there. He talks about how Tom Brady is intentional about the preparation and how that's so different throughout his career. Now, this is important for us as believers because when Jesus calls us to go out and make disciples, it's there's three facets to it, right? And he tells us to go, baptize, and teach them. But before we can do all of that, we have to prepare. That's important for us to know. He also points out how Tom Brady he prepares the week before. He's talking about the Super Bowl. He tells how Tom Brady prepares the week before the big game and uses that final week leading into the game to kind of recharge and spend time with his family. It's important for us to kind of have that balance as we're trying to bring people along and help them grow in their relationship with Jesus. That we're also setting time to recharge and spend that time with our families. Um, he talks about how Tom Brady, and this is going back to that relationship that he built with his young wide receivers, about getting together with his guys off the field, and he's showing a part to his teammates uh, that the media doesn't see. And he mentions how that the older that Tom Brady is getting, the gap is getting bigger, the generational gap. So he has to make a more concerted effort to build that relationship with the young guys. One way he does that is by using social media. And we all know about that nowadays. But think about it. Tom Brady is 40. Think about some of your um, older people that you know that are maybe in their 40s, but perhaps your parents, in their 50s, and how difficult that is for them to navigate. Uh, Tom Brady is intentionally making an effort to familiarize himself with social media in an effort to connect with his teammates deeper and better. It's important because a lot of these young guys, they're coming out of college, and this is all they've known. So he has to be very intentional about getting into their world, and it's important for us as disciple makers that we're intentional about getting in the world of those people that we're trying to lead to Jesus. He talks about how he finds a way to bring teammates along in order to grow in those relationships. He feels that it is important to have that relationship with his teammates. And because of the relationship that he forms with them, it gives him credibility when he has to speak strongly to them. One of the things that I think we sometimes get a little too caught up in is we're trying to lead people, help them grow and mature in their relationship with Christ. And we want to speak strongly to them without first building that relationship. And that's putting the horse before the chariot. We have to make sure that, not sorry, the chariot before the horse. We have to make sure that we build that relationship first and then kind of steer them in that direction. So I'm going to look at a couple of verses here, and I want to make this video short, so I don't want to spend too much time on here. A couple of verses that I found talking about discipleship, and let me share my screen here. Here we go. This is Acts chapter 42. Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through. We're going to look at. Let's see if we can read the whole section. He says, "This is Luke writing here about the early church, and he talks about. It says, and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers, and all came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved." So a few things that stand out right away. He talks about how the breaking of bread. So they were coming together. They were sharing in meals. In the ancient culture, sharing in meals was you're welcoming somebody in. You're more or less uh, saying they were a part of your family. So this is important, and this is an example of that community being built, which set that pattern for discipleship to begin to happen and to grow. Remember, the apostles, they all walked with Jesus. So this is something that Jesus did with them throughout his ministry. Think about how Jesus um, shared with them in meals. Obviously, the Last Supper comes to mind right away. But even before that, right, there were other times that they spent together. Think about the intimate relationship that Jesus had with the three disciples, right? Peter, James, and John, and how they when Jesus went through some of his toughest times as a in his earthly ministry as a man, they were there with him. Um, so he was preparing them and showing them, right? He was walking. They were doing life together. This is something that one of the ladies that I follow on YouTube, on it's just a BK Apologist channel. Her name is Dana. She talks about doing life together, and it's important. That's what discipleship is about. Is doing life together. Uh, let's see. It says, a day by day attending the temple together, and again breaking bread in their homes. They received their food with glad and generous hearts. This idea of community, right, and being together was key in discipleship. Um, let's look at a few other verses here. Let's see. So we're going to look at Paul and Timothy's relationship, because this is, I think, is one of the better and probably most widely known examples in the New Testament of someone actively discipling someone else. I mean, he says this is Acts chapter 16, and I think we're going to look at a couple of verses here. But Paul wanted Timothy to accompany him, and he took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in these places, for they all knew that their father was a Greek. As they went on their way through the cities, they delivered to them for observance the decisions that had been reached by the apostles and elders who were in Jerusalem. So the churches were strengthened in the faith, and they increased in their numbers daily. So Paul knows about Timothy, right? This is if you go back a couple of verses, Timothy is someone that's already in the faith. Paul kind of takes him under his wing. He says that Paul wanted Timothy to accompany him. So Paul identified uh, a young man in Jesus who he wanted to bring along to help grow and to mature in his faith and to prepare him. Right? We know that later on in the New Testament, Timothy is one of the I think he is the pastor, one of the leaders of the church in Ephesus. And there's a big trust there that Paul has in him. It says he took him, right? So they went on this journey together. But this is, I think, that's important. This part here that says they delivered to them for observance the decisions that had been reached by the apostles. So Paul brought Timothy along, but Paul allowed Timothy to also take some steps. Um, Timothy was also sharing this news and this information that they were receiving. It wasn't Paul just doing all the talking. As Paul brought Timothy along, he gave Timothy an opportunity to develop and grow in his skills. A lot of times when we're taking people under our wing, we don't fully grasp that the whole point of it is to you bring them under your wing for a little while, and eventually you let them go. A lot of times, some of these pastors want to have people come under their wing, and they struggle to let them go. And you want to keep that relationship, but you want to also let them flourish. And by keeping them under your wing, they can only flourish but so much. And let's see. Actually, we're gonna go right here to Second Timothy, and this is gonna be from verse 10. Listen to this because this highlights how Paul did life with Timothy, how they spent this time together. It says, "You, however, have followed my teachings, right? My conduct, my aim in life, my faith, my patience, my love, my steadfastness, my persecutions and sufferings have happened to me at Antioch, at Iconium, and at Lystra, which persecutions I endured. Yet from all them the Lord rescued me." Paul had Timothy with him throughout all of these tough times. And in the midst of all this, Timothy was able to witness Paul's conduct, his faith, his patience, his love, his steadfastness. In the midst of all this pain and suffering that Paul was going through, Timothy had a front row seat. They they did life together. They shared in this and they're in the good times and the tough times, right? Timothy was there. I think it's important for us as we're trying to help people grow, right? And like I said, if you look at that passage at the end of at the end of the book of Matthew, when Jesus is telling them, he says, "Go and make disciples, baptizing them and teaching them all that I have taught you, right? That I have commanded you." And in order to be able to do that, you have to have that relationship that's there. Otherwise, it falls on deaf ears to a degree, right? Um, so I say all that just to kind of emphasize how important it is to have that relationship and how you have to do life together before you can get to these things, and how Paul modeled that for us, right? He took Timothy under his wing, and Timothy observed all of this, and we know that in the letters that Paul writes to Timothy, First and Second Timothy, he is encouraging Timothy, and Timothy has taken on this step, right? He's taken on this mantle of becoming a church leader himself. Um, so like I said, it's important to have that relationship and steer them, but then you also have to let them grow and flourish. You can't keep them under your wing the whole time. And we're going to look at this last verse here, and this is Romans chapter 16, verse 21. This is another example, just highlighting how Timothy went from being a young man in the faith to walking with Paul, seeing Paul endure and go through all these things, and now he is a leader and a pastor of a church. He says, "Timothy, my fellow worker, greets you. So do Lucius, Jason, and Sosipater, my kinsmen." So yes, Paul discipled Timothy, but Timothy became he at no point in that relationship or discipleship was Timothy less than Paul. All right, he was learning, right, and Paul was his teacher, but they were on equal footing, and the whole purpose of Paul is kind of taking that that step towards beginning to disciple Timothy was to bring him up to his level, and that's the goal for us as well. When we're discipling people, we want to bring them up to the level that we're on, and equip them to do what we're trying to do, what God has called us to do, right? Go, baptize, and teach. That's the same goal we want to also set up for those that we're discipling. All right. Let's see if I can find my mouse here. Here we go. Cool. I appreciate you guys tuning in. That's really all that I have for today. If you like what you're seeing on here, hit that like button, share, subscribe. Um, if you already saw me uh, on Instagram, I have the Instagram already, but if in case you didn't, here it is. the Baker Pod. I still don't know how to get the icon to actually show up on the video, but I'm gonna figure it out eventually. And I'll have it up there. I appreciate you guys. Have a great day. Be blessed. Have a great Sunday. Have a great week. And I'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for tuning into the Baker Pod.